We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. As you see this morning, we're talking about the immigration crisis. We have a panel of guests on this morning. The guest this morning, more of a take from the side of, looking at immigration reform and not liking some of what the administration has done. We're also going to have a program next week with others on that are more in support of some of the actions that have been taken of late. So we're going to have Republican, Democrat, both sides. A lot of people have strong issues on this, but the shows will be separate. So today's one, there'll be more next week. And the important thing, too, is I'll be moderating and we'll take your phone calls on however you feel about it as well. So join us now. As we said in the first part of the program, we are joined by Representative John Ray Clemens, Democrat here in Tennessee, and now Elliot Osman, well-known local attorney who's very involved in these immigration issues. Appreciate you coming on. And first thing he said when he sat down is, Nick, this is a fast-moving story. He goes, everything I was thinking about we would talk about from yesterday morning has changed by this morning. We all know now about the executive order signed by the president yesterday afternoon, kind of rescinding the policy of separating them. Your thoughts right now on where we go from here, and I assume you were pleased he did that, but did he go far enough?
No, he did not. He never does. He takes a step, and then when he has a barrage of attacks, he then has to do some other things in order to address the problem. What he has done is he has ordered that all families be kept together, and that's good. The problem is that he's going to run directly into a court order that already exists called Flores v. Sessions. And what that court order says is that you cannot keep a child in a jail longer than 20 days. And if his intent is to keep the parents in jail until their case is disposed of, he's going to run headlong into that court order.
There will be legal challenge. Let me ask you this, if you can give us a little perspective, Elliot. Sure. As I was thinking about this happening, now, this immigration issue has been going on for a while. There have been families coming across the border. In the past, when they came across with children and were, taken into custody, it wasn't something where they were locked up in this way, or how did they handle it in the past? What was different? He decided now we're going to start locking them up as opposed to putting them someplace where they're then returned home?
Before, they were kept in detention centers only so long as necessary in order to screen them and see, number one, whether they were a security risk, and number two, whether or not they had an asylum claim. If they were if they had an asylum claim, what would happen is they were first screened by the U.S. asylum officers, who would do what's called a credible fear interview. Now, that credible fear interview was a very cursory review of whether or not they had a possible legal claim to asylum. As your listeners probably already know, whether or not the claim for asylum is wholly legitimate is saved for an immigration judge. But if they were found to have any portion of their claim related to asylum, they were then scheduled for immigration court, and they were then released along with the children. And some people say, well, they never show up. That's not true. There was an accounting made in the last full fiscal year of the federal government, which starts in October. In this case, it was October 2016. And for the full 12 months, starting in October 2017 and continuing, or 16, and continuing through October of 2017, that's where the fiscal year is with the federal government. Only 1% of the people that were given a bond failed to appear.
So in essence then, though, the detention centers were what they had before, but then Attorney General Sessions, I guess, made the order from the president to go ahead and really start cracking down. And that's what we've seen recently, where instead of going to detention centers, they were taken to holding facilities, jails, and they had to be separated from their children.
That's correct.
And that's the way that played out.
That's right.
Okay. Do you have any clients of your own here that have any connection with any of the families at this point that have been detained, to your knowledge? I don't know if you do. I just was wondering.
Not yet. But, of course, they have now, we've been advised that these kids have now been dispersed
The 2,300 that were already removed. What's going to happen to them?
Well, we don't know, because the Trump administration is taking no steps whatsoever to reunite those 2,300 kids with their parents. Right. And what we've been told is that there's a possibility none of them can be reunited.
So what happens to them?
Well, what they're supposed to do is the foster families that they've been placed with now, and they're scattered all over the country. For all I know, there are some right here in the Nashville area. Okay. We have a lot of religious groups that take their responsibilities to care for children seriously, and they have volunteered to be foster families. Now, what those families need to do, and they may not know it yet, but what they need to do, and this word needs to be spread out, is to try to get what's called special immigrant juvenile status for their children. They are considered abandoned, and because the federal government took their parents away, not because the parents abandoned them, but they are considered legally and technically abandoned. That qualifies them for special immigrant juvenile status. They need to go into juvenile court in the county in which they're located. They need to hire a lawyer to do it, and then get themselves appointed guardians. And at that point, the guardians, on behalf of the kids, can then apply for special immigrant juvenile status. After those kids have had that status for a year, they can then apply for a green card.
But against all this, and that's great, they may never see their parents again.
That's correct.
Right. Well, based on those reports that we started hearing yesterday about these children being dispersed all over the country, I actually sent a letter to Governor Haslam yesterday asking him to do whatever he could within his power and jurisdiction to mandate that the children being placed in Tennessee be provided with identification, contact information for their parents, information and documentation showing the whereabouts of their parents at all times. Now, we both know, as lawyers up here and yourself, the state's jurisdiction on this issue is very limited. This is really predominantly a federal issue. But regardless, I asked the governor, and I'm sure I have the support of many of my colleagues, that he should do whatever he can within his power to make sure that those children who were placed here do not lose that connection with their parents in some way. I mean, it's just the same as, you know, when you go to the hospital and you have a baby, you're both given, you know, bracelets, identification. Right. You keep that connection between them. Why can't we do that with these immigrant children? Why can't we do whatever it takes to keep that connection between them and their parents, regardless if they're, you know, heaven forbid they're separated from their parents, but if they are and they are placed around the country thousands of miles away from their parents, there should be some documentation and connection so that whoever fosters these children, whoever cares for these children, knows exactly where their parents are at all times in the system.
Let's take a few calls. I know we have a lot of ground to cover, but as I said, a lot of people have opinions on this, as you can imagine. Sure. Let's go to Joe. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hi, Joe.
Just listening to some of your guest speakers this morning, but Mr. Trump is so hard-headed. He doesn't listen to any of his advisors, evidently, and they're so scared of it to disagree with him that they'll get fired. That's the reason that his daughter and his wife, evidently, told him, said, you know, you better back out of this deal because you fixing to cause a big mess here. And really what it comes down to is all the Republicans that's running for offices, for governor, for senator, or whatever, they was on a pretty good roll saying they agree with Mr. Trump, everything he did and said. Now they found out that, you know, this is not working out for them, and we better get away from this, because it's going to kill us in our re-election bid.
Yeah, you wonder, I mean, Representative, that he's right about, you know, the president's wife and daughter weighing in on this, but you wonder, you know, does the president rescind this because he really in his own mind decides, as he said, that he didn't really like seeing these children in this situation, or was it because of what Joe says is political. I mean, all of a sudden, this is going to be very damaging potentially to the Republicans with midterms right upon us, and this hitting them. You know, there's folks here in the state of Tennessee backed it. Now he's backed out. You know, is it political, or did he do it?
Well, I think everything he does, there's something behind it, and of course, in political office, every decision is political. Yeah. So I think you have people on both sides of the aisle. As Congressman Cooper pointed out earlier this week, he's got colleagues on both sides of the aisle who strongly disagree with separating children from their parents. So it's not just one party or the other. Of course, President Trump is a Republican, and Republicans are going to back him to the hilt. And in fact, Marsha Blackburn is defending him still and defending this policy still to this day. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why she's doing that, but between her and Diane Black, they defend this policy. They're running ads, about immigration around the clock. It's interesting because the gubernatorial candidates, and as we mentioned earlier, governors have very little say in this whole policy, and Governor Haslam even reprimanded a lot of the gubernatorial candidates for this earlier. But it's absolutely political, and in fact, the reports late last night were that there are people in the White House yesterday, and probably still right now, trying to come up with another policy to keep enforcing immigration strongly, but to do it in another way that circumvents the law, and that it keeps allowing their administration to prosecuting these individuals in the manner that Mr. Osment spoke of earlier.
I have a different perspective on it. I don't think President Trump has any principles at all that he really believes in immigration. I mean, just a few years ago, he was a Democrat living in New York, contributing to Democrats. Here's what I think is happening. I think he has surrounded himself with some extremists, and that includes a man by the name of Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is on the president's staff, and he is relying on Stephen Miller for his ideas on how to make this immigration issue even bigger so that it can draw in more extreme right-wingers to support it. And so he listens to Stephen Miller. He implements Stephen Miller's suggestions. And then the rest of the Republican Party comes along and throws a fit and says, you can't do this. This is not right. You need to consult with us before you wind up with these racist, right-wing, extremist ideas. Maybe Trump has learned his lesson and he'll start doing that, but up until now, he hasn't. He has listened to Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is the worm in this apple pie, and he is the one that's setting up the president for all these problems.
Let's go to Cindy. Cindy, good morning. Hey, Cindy, go ahead.
Hey, how you doing, Nick?
Good. Hi, Cindy.
Okay, I just got a couple of issues to say, okay?
Sure.
All right, for one, you're saying I think should be no catch and release, throw you back over the border right when you come over, and send you back with your kids, give you a bottle of water or lunch and say get. But number two is nobody realizes that when you have a child that's an American, born, you have one, and he gets in a little trouble, tip-tap in school, nothing major, no knives, nothing that, besides being a disruption in the classroom sometimes. And you know what he gets? I'm going to tell you what happens. He'll end up 6 months in juvenile hall up there in Murfreesboro or in Nashville. And this American one, and we're sitting here crying like babies because these people broke the law crossing the border. We can't afford to keep doing all this other stuff to try to change the law. The law states, do not come up in here. And that means don't do it. Do it legally. So what the heck is wrong with everybody who and then they want to say right winger. Well, I was a left winger for a long time, and I heard Bill Clinton say he was getting them out of here, can't take anymore because we can't afford it. I've heard Bush say it, did nothing. I've heard Obama say it, and then I've heard Hillary say it. It was all on tapes. They show the videos. I remember it distinctly, and that's how they won their vote. Finally, we got a man, and we're not going to break. I'm saying They've got to all go back. We got them from Africa, pouring in from Ethiopia.
Okay, I get her point on that. If you want to respond, just in her mind, it's again, and like in many, you know, why not just send them back when it is? And many of them think, you know, that some of these folks coming over are bringing their children with, thinking that that will allow them to have the hedge to use them to get in, because they wouldn't separate us.
Well, here is the problem. In the first place, this young lady has strong views, but doesn't know the law. Because what these people are doing, first of all, they are fleeing mass gang problems. Honduras and El Salvador both had the #1 murder rate in the world in 2015, and as far as I know, 2016. They are fleeing murders with their children to protect their children and to save themselves. Now, in that situation, under the law, these people have the legal right to enter the United States and to claim asylum.
Does it, now, are you sure? I want to clarify on that, because the refugee status. I mean, there are countries all over the world that have crime. Okay, and I know what you're saying. Those countries have a real problem. But just because you have murders in your country doesn't make you a refugee.
Well, it does if they. You say refugee. There's a technical difference
or
between
political
a refugee
asylum or whatever
or
you're seeking. I just recognize we take people in when we know they're being persecuted in their country, you know, as opposed to, I guess that's what you're referring to, because if it's just because it's tough times in their country, well, you know what, a lot of countries have tough times. Doesn't mean you're enabled just to leave and go to another country.
Well, that's the reason why we have the asylum law that we have. The asylum law says that these people have a right to enter the United States and claim asylum. Now, here's the catch. You cannot claim asylum until you have both feet planted on U.S. soil. Now, you can apply at places outside of the U.S. for refugee status.
Okay.
But in order to claim asylum, you have to have both feet planted on U.S. soil. And if you don't, you can claim it, but it doesn't do any good.
And you think those maybe sometimes who are sent back then face horrible consequences?
Oh, I know they do.
And these are very stringent laws. I mean, separating refugees from asylum seekers, I mean, you need to do that first and foremost, because there's different standards there and different ways of processes, an extensive process. And then, of course, you know, there are a certain number of thresholds you have to meet to be granted asylum in the United States for various reasons. And of course, we know that Jeff Sessions just eliminated domestic violence from a list of those things. So, you know, this policy is evolving, and like Mr. Osmond said, Stephen Miller is behind most of it. And again, you know, comparing this to the juvenile justice system, there's a reason that we're reforming our juvenile justice system. So I don't think that comparison holds much water.
On that note, we'll take a quick break. Back with more phone calls with our guests right after this. Stay with us.
This is a story